All right, let's jump right in. Today we're diving into a source that gives us a really rare and personal look into a spiritual world that's often wrapped in mystery. We're talking about Nuh Ha Mim Keller's Sea Without Shore, which is a guide to the Sufi path, or what many people know as Islamic mysticism. So let's start with the big question. What is it all for?
You know, at the very heart of this entire tradition is this one powerful goal. It was captured perfectly by an early master, Junaid. It's all about learning to separate what's real and eternal from, well, everything else that's just temporary. It's about figuring out how to be with the divine directly with nothing in between.
Okay, that's a beautiful idea, right? But what does it actually look like? How does a person go from just living their day-to-day life to trying to perceive something eternal? Well, that's what we're going to explore, and we're not going to do it with a bunch of abstract theories. We're going to do it by looking at the real lives of people who actually walked this path.
The source material is built around these incredible portraits of people the author knew personally in Syria, Jordan, and Turkey. And these aren't some dusty historical figures from centuries ago. We're talking about modern men whose lives are basically a roadmap. By meeting them, we can really start to understand the journey.
Our first guide is Sheikh Abd al-Shaghouri. He was a spiritual master, a teacher, a poet, just this incredible Sufi sheikh from Damascus who passed away back in 2004. And his life was a living, breathing lesson in one of the path's most important virtues.
And that virtue is called futuwa. It's a really foundational idea in Sufism. The best way to think about it is like a kind of spiritual chivalry, or maybe radical generosity. It's the constant practice of putting other people's needs and their comfort before your own. For the sheikh, this wasn't just some nice idea. It was literally the fabric of his being.
And the source gives us this brilliant story of futuwa in action. The author talks about watching the sheikh stop at a fruit cart one day. But instead of picking the best, shiniest apples, he very carefully and deliberately fills his bag with the worst ones. You know, the bruised ones, the ones with nicks, the ones no one else would ever buy. And his reason? He wanted to save the seller from having to throw them away and lose money. It's such a small thing, but what a massive lesson in empathy, right?
So then the author, seeing that the sheikh is an older man, offers to carry this bag of bruised apples for him. But the sheikh refuses. He just simply quotes the Prophet Muhammad saying, "He who needs a thing should carry it." And in that one moment, you see his whole philosophy. It's a life of selfless action that's just so deeply rooted in the prophetic example. He wasn't just imitating the teaching, he was embodying it.
But here's the thing, the sheikh was also incredibly practical. For him, the spiritual path wasn't about some endless, aimless wandering or like a philosophical hobby. Nope, it was a road to a very specific destination. The entire point of walking the path was to actually get there. And he puts it so clearly, in his own words right here. A path that doesn't actually lead you to a deeper connection with the divine, well, it's useless. It's a road that goes absolutely nowhere. All the practices, the discipline, the selflessness, they all have one single ultimate purpose: to have a genuine, real, experiential knowledge of God.
Okay, so let's move to our second portrait, because this is where the picture really starts coming together. Now we meet Sheikh al-Wakil al-Arabi. He was a Faqih, which means he was a master scholar of Islamic law. And his life shows us another totally essential part of the path, this unbreakable bond between your inner spiritual state and your outer religious actions.
So, in Sufism, there's this critical idea that the outward sacred law, the Sharia, and the inward ultimate truth, the Haqiqah, are not two different things. Not at all. They're two faces of the exact same coin. Think of it like this. The Sharia is the body, the actions you do. The Haqiqah is the heart, the spiritual state that gives those actions life and meaning. You just can't have one without the other.
And Sheikh Abd was the living embodiment of this unity. For him, knowledge wasn't just something you collected in books. It was something you lived. Here's the perfect example. He got a government salary for being an imam. Outwardly, he gave a very technical legal justification for why it was permissible to accept it. But what nobody knew until after he died was that he secretly gave the entire salary away in charity every single month. He lived only on the money he made from his trade in books. You see? He fulfilled the outward law, but he was living by a much higher, hidden inner standard.
And this guy had absolutely zero tolerance for spiritual phonies. The author tells a story about visiting a supposed holy man who was putting on this huge show. When he described it later to Sheikh Abd al-Wakil, the scholar just listened patiently
and then dismissed the whole performance with 3 simple, devastatingly sharp words. He's a gum chewer. He saw right through the whole act to the ordinary reality underneath. For him, real spirituality was humble, sincere, and had nothing to do with putting on a show. So what do we learn when we put these 2 portraits together? We see that the path isn't a choice between love and law, or between the heart and your actions. It's about bringing them both together. The Sheikh and the Faqih, they represent 2 pillars holding up the very same building. So, looking at these 2 lives together, the source reveals this really clear framework for the path. First, you need a guide for the heart, a true master like Sheikh Abd who teaches by example. Second, you need a rock-solid foundation in the sacred law, lived with the kind of integrity that Sheikh Abd al-Wakil had. And third, woven through it all, is a constant practice of humility and sincerity. That was the hallmark of both men.
So, if those are the pillars supporting the path, where does the path actually lead? If you combine the Sheikh's selfless love with the scholar's disciplined practice, what is the ultimate destination?
Sheikh al-Rahman, who is also a gifted poet, tried to capture this vision in his own work. He describes the entire universe, everything we see and experience, as just a continuous outpouring from a vast, shoreless ocean of divine being. The path, then, is about learning to perceive that ocean, not just the little waves on the surface.
Near the end of his life, someone asked the Sheikh a very direct question. After all these decades on the path, what's the result? What do you get? And his answer was just breathtaking. So simple, but so deep. Being with Allah. Not becoming God, but being with God. A state of presence, of awareness, of connection that's really beyond our normal ways of understanding.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with that core mystery. The path, as we see it through these lives, is a journey from seeing the world as a bunch of separate things to seeing it as a reflection of a single reality. It leads to a state of being with the divine. But what that truly means, to be with something so vast, so total, without the usual relations of space, time, or form, well, that's the central question the path invites its travelers to answer for themselves.